around it. A lot has changed. It's already been 4 months since we did this, RJ, with a panel. 4 months has gone by. That was April, May, June, July, August. I can't believe it. And so much has changed. So, you know what? It's 10 o'clock. Our time, this hour is going to fly by just like it did the last time. So to be respectful of your time and all of our attendees' time, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get started. So welcome to this Q&A webinar for the restaurant industry, sponsored by Strategic Hospitality Search. My name is Joe D'Alessandro, and I'll be your host today. And we're honored to have RJ Melman, president of Let Us Entertain You Enterprises, here as our subject matter expert. Welcome, RJ.
Thank you.
I started working in restaurants in college and have made it my career ever since. It is, you know, among the most challenging and demanding professions one can choose, but as everybody that is joining us now knows, it's also among the most rewarding. But the restaurant industry is, I think, and I think you'll all agree, the industry hit hardest by the COVID pandemic. The restrictions imposed have caused devastation at every level for full service operators. We just did a survey and had tons of participants. And this revealed that 22% of restaurants that increased carryout incurred further losses as a result of that. And the same amount, 22%, increased their sales over pre-COVID levels. Only 14% have maintained the same revenue level, and 41% are barely staying afloat. We're praying that everyone is well and stays well, our families, friends, and colleagues, and our communities, especially those on the front lines in restaurants and lodging, food service, healthcare, grocery. Thank you, and stay well. So this hour-long webinar cannot calm every fear or answer every question that you have. But we asked those who registered what questions they do have for Mr. Melman. Questions right now about what they're facing. We got a ton of responses. We reviewed every single response, and many questions overlapped, and that's a good thing. And we aggregated the questions, and we're going to do our best to get to them all. During the webinar, if you have a question, you can use the raise hand function to ask it. I'll keep an eye on that and do my best to get to it. 4 months ago, we had a webinar just like this one when Illinois was in phase 1, and so much has changed since then. So thank you, RJ, for taking the time to be with us today. On this webinar, we have independent restaurateurs, leaders in multi-unit groups, corporate managers, and chefs. There are so many issues and different perspectives based on the size of your company. We're all trying to figure out where the business is going today, tomorrow, and when this pandemic is over, and it's a moving target. So this is not a lecture, and neither is it a fortune-telling session. So some of you ask questions like, where's the restaurant industry going? And nobody has a crystal ball. We can't answer that. So I tried to really get to some really more specific questions, and neither myself nor RJ can predict the future, but what RJ can do is provide insight as an executive of one of the world's leading restaurant organizations, Let Us Entertain You, which operates 130 restaurants in 7 states. So RJ, with a name like Melman, it's easy to think that you were born, you got everything you wanted, you went to college, and then your father, Let Us Entertain You founder Richard Melman, you know, just put you in a corner office. Was that the case?
Definitely not. I don't think that I don't have a lot of advantages growing up. And I think the biggest advantage I have is that, you know, one of the greatest restaurateurs maybe in the history of modern restauranting, it happens to be my dad. That doesn't give me an automatic pass, but it gives me an unbelievable consultant, advisor, advice giver, mentor along the way. And it's so nice to have him in my corner and in my siblings' corner, but that is lucky. But no, my career in the restaurant industry started very young as well. I was bussing tables when I was 12 and 13. I started as a prep cook outside the company when I was 17 doing high school jobs. I was I also worked at grocery stores, you know, as a bagger, typical, you know, teenage jobs around. Got a passion for cooking. Did that through college. I actually worked at Chili's as a line cook during college, and eventually, once graduating, went into a culinary program with lettuce and became a sous chef. Worked that way through management, and finally decided that probably a future in cooking wasn't for me. I'd worked and staged a bunch of places in Napa Valley and outside of the company, and then started managing in the front of house. Started as a very young manager. I'm probably skipping that I've worked every job: busing, serving, bartending along the way, hosting, on top of all the light line cook duties and hourly roles in the back of the house as well. So I did it all along the way, became a young manager, worked my way up to a general manager, and then finally became a partner when my brother and I opened our first restaurant together, which was about 12 years ago. And then Molly, my sister, joined shortly thereafter. So I've been a partner and then worked as a partner for, you know, 10 or 12 years before finally being promoted to president of the company. So
thank you. I think it's important for our participants and listeners to know that you just didn't go from the backyard to the boardroom, that you worked your way up. You've done everything that the rest of us have done, from, you know, prep cook to busing to dishwashing and everything else in between, that you've been in the trenches. So you participated in how many restaurant openings?
Probably over 25. I've lost count, but within lettuce, I've actually helped consult on some projects outside as well. So. Okay.
And then how many restaurants have you had to close?
Oh man. Me personally, 3 or 4, not as many, but I mean, clearly we've closed some while being president of lettuce, but I didn't necessarily oversee them on a direct basis. We've even closed a few during the shutdown. We had a lot of stuff that was near its end of its lease and wasn't worth reopening, or wasn't even able to reopen in any sort of logical way. So.
Okay. Sometimes, I mean, it could be very tough, and it could be heartbreaking when you put your heart and soul into everything.
So, you know, there's a time where we could close a restaurant, but almost certainly the people who wanted to stay with the company could, because of our size and our geographic, you know, because we had usually had a lot of restaurants in a neighborhood. If we closed a restaurant, it was very easy for us to find homes for everyone who needed one. You know, when you close something during COVID, it's like, yeah, we're closing this restaurant, but we also don't know when we can hire anyone back per se, or a great majority of the people who are working at the other restaurants. So it's especially hard now because you are really don't have a lot of options. You know, we have probably around 50% of the company, of the hourly, of the people in the company still on furlough, as we did in day one, which none of us anticipated it lasting this long, and trying to figure that out. But no, it's you know, closing it is certainly not fun, but also watching something not work isn't fun either. So I guess there is some light at the end of the tunnel when you can finally admit that it doesn't work.
Well, that brings me to my first question, and that's this: a restaurateur in Texas that asks, how do you recharge when you've lost your business? How would you encourage that restaurateur who is a single unit restaurateur that no doubt put everything that they had, you know, on the line with this business, and because of COVID had to close it up? How would you encourage that person?
Yeah, you know, I can only relate somewhat to what's going on. You know, I will say that it's pretty simple, that my days are not every day as joyous. I think that it is certainly important that leaders in general are positive. Generally, the more upbeat and positive that you're thinking about the future, it's important to be. I would be lying if I said I don't wake up some days and say, this is never going to end. I'm never going to make money again. I'm never going to have a distribution. I'm never going to, you know, those days happen all the time where you say, God, this was supposed to go 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and now we're on month 5, or, you know, 6 doesn't seem far away. Nothing seems to change in the fall. And yeah, you get bummed out. And then, you know, for me, and listen, you put all your life savings in a restaurant, it closes, it's pretty devastating. And every idea that you have goes into it and you can't get that back. But for me, it's as simple as just having one little victory a day. And if we can make one little thing better or one thing that moves in the right direction, it's like give you something to hold on to. I don't need to hit a home run tomorrow, but having some degree of positivity, whether it means, we teach our teams to get psyched up about small victories as well. If you can beat last week by $200, you don't need to beat last week by 1,000%. You got to beat it by 0.1%, because then you're growing. And if you can keep doing that week after week after week, it starts to feel like a little bit of winning streak. And I'm sure this gentleman or lady in Texas is not feeling like winning right now, but it's nice to just have small victories and to search for that. And that's what I can say.
Okay. All right. So we have a fellow Chicagoan who asks if historic ethnic hotspots will survive, like Greektown or Chinatown or Little Italy, with all the closures that are happening and all the changes. Do you think these ethnic hotspots in Chicago will survive the pandemic?
Yeah,
and keep their ethnic feel?
Yeah, I do. I don't see a reason why Chinatown would disappear. I mean, they are hurt just like other parts of town, whether it's downtown or other, but they are neighborhoods. And I actually think the neighborhoods have a chance to be more successful in a world with low tourism, in a world with, not a lot of travel, not a lot of people staying in hotels. Those neighborhoods actually have a chance to thrive because there are people who live there and need to eat out and have a desire to do that. So I don't see that those places go away. There are forces that work against Greektown, as it pertains to Chicago in general, that it's, borders the West Loop. As the West Loop starts to expand and be redeveloped, some of that pushes down that way as as longtime restaurateurs who own these places start to retire, maybe their family businesses, they don't pass them to the next generation. Those are bigger, I think, forces working against Greektown and even Chinatown than in my opinion, than the redevelopment and the kind of the tiredness of the generation that's running the restaurants is a bigger deal than them not being around because of the pandemic.
Gotcha. Interesting take. Gotcha. All right. We had a lot of questions about real estate. So this one's kind of broad and it might answer some of the other questions that were asked, but how are you rethinking your real estate strategy in terms of both site location, site selection, and lease negotiations?
Sure. We haven't engaged in too many new projects right now. So I will say that we're not, we had a pipeline of stuff that was being done. We're not really looking out beyond that pipeline. So we're not engaging in a lot of real estate negotiations right now. We are anticipating that, like anyone else, there's going to be fallout and there could be prime locations available. I think that the commercial real estate market, we certainly look at it as being maybe overinflated, and there's a chance to secure things with, either more tenant improvement dollars available. I think you'll see landlords with a real need to fill their spaces and might be more generous. So we would hold out for more aggressive deals if you wanted us to be in there. The hardest deal to make is the one you can't walk away from. If you can walk away from anything and not do it, I think it gives you a lot more negotiating power. There's not a restaurant that we have to do. And I think that gives us a lot more flexibility when we go to look at locations. We're certainly have slowed down a little bit of our search for the financial district stuff at the Loop in Chicago, which is, heavily office. I'd like to see how office rebounds before we jump in on that. We have been more flexible at looking at suburban than we probably were before. This might be a huge turn of, a flight to the suburbs. I think, at least in Chicago itself, you see violence plus the need for space is probably making some people rethink the city. Some people are moving out of the state in general, but there are people that are just moving to the suburbs or just want, if they've been trapped in their apartments, they don't find that apartment living as important to them as it was before. So we're more flexible at looking at that. And then for the first time, it's not a real surprise. We have a fairly diverse portfolio, but we're looking at drive-through locations for our quick service places that we might not have done that before, where we have all inlines. So I think it just gives us, we want to be as diverse about what we're looking for as well. But you have to believe that there are going to be deals to be had. I was talking to another restaurateur friend in New York, and he said, you know, there's going to be people who put millions of dollars into rehabbing a place and need to walk away from it that are either undercapitalized or can't do it. And you just kind of hold out to see what shows up, and there will be spots available that you could get into by just taking over the lease or something. But you know, we're not in such a rush to open a bunch of new places either. So.
Right. So let me ask you that. Let's just look at that scenario, right? You've got a great location. You've got a friendly landlord. You've got a site that's built out. All you need to do is change the sign, change the pictures, get your chef in there and open. I mean, it's not that simple. But are you looking for different elements in the lease than you would 6 months ago? So like, would you be in that scenario, would you be looking for a different force majeure clause? Would you want are you asking for pandemic clauses and things of those natures so that you're protected in
I'll
leases
say in
now?
general, Lettuce's MO, and this is our negotiation. I think a lot of people try to get the lowest base rent possible. You know, they don't like paying percentage. We have been a group that in general has liked to be, and partially I think it's our own financing structure that we really finance our restaurants ourselves, and we don't have a lot of external capital or really any in most of our restaurants, that that we look for deals that minimize our risk. So we look for, in general, deals with a nice amount of TI, a pretty low base rent, but we are always happy to pay percentage rent because we feel like if we're having good times, we are happy to share in those good times, and if things are bad, you know, that it sort of takes care of itself, that the rent itself rolls back down. So I think our best deals sort of fall into that. And do I think that there could be more push to have different languages in leases? Yes, I think it's possible, but landlords aren't dumb either, right? They're gonna push back. It reminds me, I have a friend who owns a giant insurance brokerage company, and he was talking about, is there gonna be pandemic insurance? He goes, you know, in 2001, when 9/11 happened, that before 9/11, there was terrorism insurance policies, and they were really cheap and no one bought them. And then after 9/11, everyone wanted one, but they got really expensive. And then so people stopped buying them. And so so now it made it like unaffordable the other direction because the insurance company was always kind of hedging what's going on. And I think this falls in that same category as like, we're going to try to get as much stuff in a lease as possible. Yes. But the landlord's going to push back. Like, they're aware of what's going on too. So they're not going to leave themselves. But I do know that one thing out of this, and I would say this, is that it makes you, when a landlord can be flexible with you and support you, you know, we have a lot of places where we've paid rent for 20 years without missing a payment. You know, you say, what, I value that relationship. And I think the best people have stepped up, and we've had a lot of amazing landlords that have really helped us in our hard times, and those people won't be forgotten. And then there's probably a lot of people out there that have given people a really difficult time. And, you know, you always remember that when you say, who was the person who helped me when I needed it the most? And
okay,
people like that.
All right, great. No, that's very wise. Shared risk. That's a true partner. You know, instead of just, this is how much the rent is every month, working on a percentage basis, you have a true partner. I don't know what it's going to look like down the road when somebody says, okay, pandemic over, nobody has this anymore. But, you know, one of the questions was, are you looking to capitalize on opportunities or sit back for a year or so? So, you know, let's say that we pick a date, February 1st, 2021, Anthony Fauci comes out and says, pandemic over, everything's fine. You know, would you be looking to, get go into growth mode again, or to sit back a little bit and see if there's a relapse, see if there's, you know, any other issues that post-pandemic issues or re-pandemic issues?
I mean, we're fairly cautious to begin with, so I don't think that we're just going to jump in and say, we're going to do 15 restaurants in the next 6 months or whatever. That's not how that would work. Our pipeline kind of works a little bit farther out than that anyway. Yeah, I think that you survive the next 6, 12 months, whatever it is, and there's a lot of green grass for the restaurateurs. There's a lot of value in staying open. While that is challenging, by the way, I don't think that that's an easy, message to finish, but it's or to get to, but you got to think that there's less competition. You got to think that there's this yearning to go out, that people will start traveling in. Do I think it's going to be perfect and conventions are going to come back overnight? No, I don't. But I think that there is going to be a real desire to get back to pre-pandemic activity and what you could do, and throwing parties, and weddings were delayed and all those things. And, it's just, I think that we're going to end up in a world where if you get there, there's going to be a lot of reward.
Yeah, I think people are dying to get back to quote unquote normal life. Go to a ball game, go, elbow up to a bar and have a beer, and get back to normal life. I've got a pretty specific question here, again about leases. This person is obviously in a specific situation. What are some negotiation tactics to look out for and utilize when negotiating a new lease agreement with a landlord in these times, especially when said landlord has a larger than usual inventory of pad sites?
So it's a new lease this person's looking at, it looks like.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a lot of great advice. We don't we don't do a lot of development on pad work in general, but I think that a landlord that has a lot of inventory, you realize that their carrying costs, I think just knowing where another person is in the negotiations is important. If they're long on real estate, they're paying a lot of tax, they're paying a lot of, mortgage theoretically on these properties. I think taking those things off people's hands can be helpful. And maybe the quicker you can get it off people's hands and help them move a little bit quicker could be good. I like to negotiate to protect the downside. Maybe you can give them something on the upside. But I don't have a lot of advice other than if their position is that they have a lot of inventory, appealing to them and trying to get something off their books would probably be helpful. And I think you'd be a little bit more aggressive in doing so.
Okay. All right. So just be a little bit more aggressive in general, and maybe structure a little bit of a partnership deal, kind of the way that you have, to give them some upside for giving you a lower base rent or CAM or something. Okay. All right. We've got a number of general management questions while business is restricted. Okay. Do you have a plan if Chicago phases back to a complete shutdown again? I mean, if it's just like, okay, we're going back to phase one, what are the broad strokes for a restaurateur? I mean, how would you suggest they handle that? If it's like, okay,
so we are, as our group, we're thinking about what happens when you go back to delivery only. I guess that would be the farthest. Clearly, if we had to shut down restaurants entirely, we'd have a different plan. But the short of it is that there would be there'd clearly be a reduction in force. Unfortunately, it's hard to imagine a world where servers and bussers and whatever could keep working without being able to serve tables. We'd go down to a carry-out only model. For us, it is about having the most affordable carry-out options. We either use Talk to Go at a lot of our restaurants and funnel people there, making sure that our offerings are correct on those. We use Chow Now as well. I think some groups probably use Olo. But those are definitely the most cost-effective for a delivery and carry-out platform, pushing guests to that. We're spending a lot of time now developing some ghost kitchen ideas that we'd run out of these restaurants to keep the sales up. There's only so much amount of X restaurant they'd order if they could order from Y restaurant as well in that same restaurant. And we're spending time creating those concepts now. And then you get to, and that's the best way, we can work, is just how do we do as much carry out as possible and make it as affordable as possible. And hopefully our rent deals on a go forward basis, which we had worked on, sort of reflect a world where sales could drop. I mean, we're very nervous about a world, regardless of whether we're delivery only, at very least in its current situation, we can only seat 25% of our dining rooms. And if you lost the patios, even by weather, we're going to be in, we're going to be in that world with or without government restriction, unless all of a sudden guests want to really dine indoors. But I assume that most people have seen that, but that there's not as much demand for indoor dining as we'd like there to be.
So in Chicago and around the country, we've seen some of our most beloved, intimate fine dining restaurants close. Blackbird in Chicago is one of the most notable ones, and the dining room where very European, you're very close to the next diner, and this is going on all over the country. Do you foresee that COVID and all its complications will lead to a radical transformation of fine dining as we know it and intimate spaces like that?
I mean, fine dining for a long time, real fine dining like the Alinea experiences, the Blackbird experiences, that has been changing over time anyway, that there is, seems like a push for more casual environments. The old European method of fine dining seems to be at least a dying art, or at least a slowing down art. In some ways, though, ironically, fine dining is could be the most resilient to this because it doesn't require herds of people. So, a restaurant that only needs 40 or 50 covers a night to make sense because it has a $300 check average. Yes, it has a smaller pool of people, to pull from who can afford to eat out, but it also requires a lot less people to fill the room. I think big indoor restaurants in some ways that required, 800, 900 covers a night, in some ways are more challenged than a place like that doesn't require that many people. That special experience, that memorable night out, I think could still work. And you, in such a small dining environment, you also have a good amount of probably some more control over how the experience goes. Maybe you can space the tables a little bit more. Most of these places at that level of fine dining, that really high end level, aren't jam packed. They're pretty reasonable spacing. Now, that being said, I haven't seen Alinea try to seat indoors right now. So they must, at 25%, it's probably pretty hard. But if you get to normal capacity, you can probably make sense of it, it would be my guess.
Okay. All right, I've got a couple of Q&As that have come in from some participants. Mark Boynton asks, are you seeing a drop-off in shareable style menu items? And does this make you rethink the offering?
We haven't seen too much. Our tapas restaurant, Cafe Barbariba, has been extremely busy. It's a whole restaurant built on sharing, and it's continued to work. It helps that it has a lot of outdoor space and an area with a retractable roof, but that has worked. We've really more changed about how people, get the food, whether we give them share silverware so they can do it so they're not eating off each other's plates. But there is some opposition, but my observations of people are that most of them don't care. They're sharing food. They're not as hypersensitive. I think the more sensitive you are to the situation, you're probably not coming out to eat. So I haven't seen it gone away. I'm not, I wouldn't be in a rush to open like a hot pot soup concept today, but I would, I don't think that it's dead forever. I still don't think people love getting individual, plated appetizers, entrees, like an older style. I don't think that that's been embraced just yet.
Okay. All right. Another live question from Mark Bromberg. Though we can now host at least a reduced number of guests, even breaking even is hard. Do you see any specific cost savings options to help, i.e. technology, et cetera? So I guess, kind of the essence of the question is, once you look beyond your prime costs, right? Your food, liquor, labor, rent, when you start getting down into the other P&L categories, where else are you looking for some cost savings, RJ?
Yeah, so a couple of things. We started QR codes for menus. I don't think that that's unique. I'm seeing it everywhere, but we're not printing as many menus. We stopped a lot of those costs. One, it allows us to change the menus more frequently. As everyone knows, there's been supply interruptions with a lot of food items, so it allowed us to change menus digitally much more quickly than we could change printed menus, and it saves the cost, especially in a world where people didn't even want the printed menu. So that QR code at the table that brings up the menu, I think, can ultimately save some short-term dollars. I'm not sure it's a forever solution. I think there could be restaurants that do have QR code menus forever, especially the more casual they are. For us, we're in the process of switching over to Toast as a POS system. There's two things I really like about them. One is they have a QR code also on the check that allows the guest to pay the bill, so it saves some time. It takes a lot of turn time off on people leaving, so I think it gives you a chance to make a little bit more money and get that next table in there a little bit quicker. And the other thing, they are piloting a order yourself QR code as well, where you would have where the menu and you could actually order it. I could see a world where you have less servers or front of the house employees on the floor, and or larger sections, because people could order a refill themselves. If you were a casual sports bar, you were a very casual restaurant, I don't see a world where people could sit down, they get the food run to them, their drinks run to them. I also really like handhelds, or for that reason, I like that about Toast as well, that people can seamlessly have a larger section, so things can be a little bit more efficient. We looked at every aspect of our tech stack. Ours is probably bigger than most people maybe on the call, but we spent time negotiating our cable rates. We were fighting for every dollar just like everyone else. And anything that we could get lower, can we get our broadband lower? Can we get our cell phone plan lower? We talked to Verizon about a savings per month on those. We looked at dead accounts, phone lines we could get rid of, vestigial stuff, anything that we could look at that found pennies is a big deal. We spent a lot of time negotiating, to-go packaging and securing that sort of supply. A huge cost of obviously doing a delivery business, or where it's a little bit more expensive. How do you save money on your streaming music services if you're paying for them? There's a lot of little tiny $50, $90, $100 bills that hit your P&L every month, I assume, at most stores, and stuff that we found that we didn't need to be paying for, we were. And how do you get, when we show sports in a restaurant, we have the entire cable package. Can we get rid of some of these channels that we don't need? We don't need TNT or whatever, let's get down to the bare minimum of what we really need to show.
Okay, so basically scrub the P&L, print out a general ledger, start ticking through it. And
yeah, one of the healthiest things I think I've done during this time is that myself and the head of finance, we do the accounts payable every week. And what's the easiest thing to do for anyone is to control the cash flow, getting a real handle on what's going out. And we literally approve every single accounts payable bill for 120 restaurants in a combined way every single week. We've been doing it since week 2 of COVID shutdown, and really wanted to make sure that there wasn't waste. We found all sorts of, things that aren't even intentional. Can you have, you have souvenir cups, or you have like a plastic disposable cup. Could you get them from Budweiser instead, so you don't have to use them? Could you have a logoed cup that they'd be giving you, so you didn't need to use it? If they're not huge expenses, but every one of those dollars adds up. And for us, we look at it, every $100 you save, you got to do $400 or $500 in sales to make up for it. For it to flow through, maybe even more, $600 in sales. So how do you tackle it that way? How do you save $100 at a time?
For sure. You familiar with the book, The Great Game of Business?
Mm-mm.
Did you ever read that?
No.
Gosh, the author's escaping me right now. I read it a number of years ago, but it's about a fellow who was, he became the CEO of like a chemical manufacturing company in central Illinois, and the company was going down the tubes. And he basically rounded everybody up in the warehouse, like 150 employees, and said, look, I'm not a savior. I can't save the company, but together we can do it. And he broke down all the different expenses, all right? Everything from, all of the cost of goods sold that they need, down to the toilet paper in the employee washrooms, and assigned a specific employee to that. So it took somebody who's a line level worker and said, you're in charge of toilet paper now. And the toilet paper savings was like 11 grand in the first year. Well, multiply that by 100 other items.
Sure.
And that could be the difference between profit, break even, and loss. So I
100%.
think sometimes that leaders need to know that as well, that like you don't have to do it all yourself. I mean, find the fighting spirit in your group and say, hey, let's get together and let's figure this out. If we have 100 vendors, then cut the list in 5 and everybody take 20 and let's call them and see where we can get the best deal. All right, hey, I just want to take a minute. We're a little past the halfway point. We had upwards of 100 people complete this 10-question survey, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I want to provide just a few results of the survey, and I want to thank everybody that participated. A lot of them I could see that are on the webinar today. As far as menus go, revised COVID era menu items actually increased for 11% of respondents. That surprised me. It surprised me that anybody had a larger menu during the COVID era. 14% stayed the same, and 75% of operators decreased their number of items, created more efficiency on their menu. Reopenings nationwide, of course, from our respondents, 35% are at 25% capacity. 59% are at 50% capacity. God bless you, way to fight. Only 2.5% are at full capacity. And regarding staffing, only 7% of operators are at the same staffing level as pre-COVID times. 40% of operators are working with 25% of their normal staff, which is kind of scary, but that makes sense. It's pretty good management, right? I mean, if your sales are going to be down 75%, you've got to reduce your staff by 75%. 75% of operators reported that 25% of their staff has permanently resigned as a result of COVID. Could you imagine trying to run your operation with only 25% or on 25% less staff than a year ago? And those of us who have been around during some shakeups, like especially 2008 and 2009, times like this do cause many to permanently leave the business. 17% of operators have lost 50% of their staff. 50% of people have said, you know what, that's it, I just don't want to do this anymore. So we're going to need a real influx of talent once we get through this. And now could be the time to make some strategic hires. Our agency is always working with qualified, passionate, and motivated candidates. And at this time, there are many who are displaced because of the pandemic. These are, super high quality individuals, and they're looking for a great company to join. So if you see a strategic hire on the horizon, hit me up after the webinar if you need to fill a current or a future management position with an A player. So we also promised for all of the folks who participated in our survey to raffle off a $100 Visa gift card. And my trusty assistant, Lori, has drawn a name, and that winner is Marvin Allen, sommelier and beverage director of the Forge Steakhouse, very famous steakhouse. So congratulations, Marvin. We'll be getting that.
Is that in Miami?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, my father went there. We had their wine list. They're famous for their wine list, their deep wine cellar. And my father bought a wine book from the Forge. It like sat under a coffee table for years in my house. I used to flip through it as a kid. Maybe it's one of the things that inspired me to get into restaurants. I don't know. So RJ, let's shift to marketing. So now on TV, I'm seeing commercials for like Wisconsin Dells Resorts, and they're showing chairs getting sanitized. They're showing their people in gloves. One showed a family that, came in social distancing and took a pizza up to their room. Obviously, they're not promoting dining in the main spaces. They're saying, hey, we're going to give you a safe space. Take yours out of your room. And how does a hospitality operation promote themselves and their themes and their unique value propositions while also assuring the public that they're keeping their health and safety top of mind? What's the right mix of these two concepts?
Yeah, obviously marketing that the place is safe is I don't want to say it's a competitive advantage, but it's definitely, it definitely matters. It's pretty apparent that the guests themselves are going to avoid places that they feel are not safe or not being treated very well. At least I find that to be true in our restaurants. I'm not, at the same time, it seems like hundreds of thousands of people are flocking to Vegas every week. The hotels are full. So it's not, where I would think off the top of my head, do I think that's the safest place in America to be, where you have a lot of travel and a lot of tourists coming in? No. We have restaurants there that are busy, and the casinos take it very, very seriously. So that part is nice. So that, the operational aspect of what's going on there seems safe. But I think marketing safety is important at the same time. The question is, how much marketing do you want to do in a world where your dining is restricted, and what is the value of it? The best value of marketing is when you can use it to fill seats. Well, if your seats are full, or you have limited capacity, my argument would be do less marketing. We're spending a lot of time marketing events and off-premise stuff and new offerings that we're doing just, to keep the reservations full. But the places that don't need it, we're not spending a lot of time marketing it right now.
Okay. What about some of the things that we talked about on the last webinar? Like you had mentioned that one or more of your restaurants was doing like virtual winemaker dinners and virtual multi-course dinners, where you would have the guest would pick up the food and beverage, and then you'd have a sommelier that would kind of do this. They'd webinar in. Are those continuing, or have they phased out?
Yeah, they're definitely slowed down. We're not doing as much. There was a time where I think people were bored and trying to figure out what to do, and they're entertaining their kids. People are out of their homes a little bit more. It's not entirely true, and the weather is also much nicer than it was before. I suspect that some of that will come back. There is Zoom fatigue is real. I'm sorry for the hundreds of people that are watching this. You're probably fatigued right now. But it's a real, we are still having some success setting that stuff up. And I think we have a lot of companies using that as well as a way to engage their employees and keep their kind of culture and camaraderie together. So they're using it as an event source to give a reason for people to talk to each other and socialize, which is maybe missing from a lot of these places, people's workforces.
Okay. I had a question come in about hiring after I made that comment. And so the question is, of course, directed to you, RJ. Are you hiring? And if so, are you finding that the talent pool is stronger now?
We are not hiring a lot. I think I prefaced it before, we have about 50% of the company is still on furlough. So the only time that we are hiring really anything of specific nature is like in a restaurant where they have either exhausted the pool of people who worked in that restaurant and now need to start looking for people. But we have found there are some great employees. I know anecdotally that people are finding a lot of great people who are a little bit more freed up to hire. We are not in that position yet, but I do anticipate that there's a lot of people looking for work, and we'll take some great opportunities. So
great. Number of questions about menu engineering and procurement. This next question, you could be really in a class for 6 months to really dig deep into this. So try to address it topically. How do you cut costs with food but still give great quality in your dishes? If you've got to shave a few points off the food cost, how do you attack that?
I mean, from a pricing standpoint, we're always looking for better and less expensive. So if there's it's really hard for us to say we're looking for something cheaper and worse. That's not a great approach to doing something. So, through this process, even going through the accounts payable, I found that one of our restaurants, we have 60 different concepts. So we do not centralize a lot of purchasing. But like one of our concepts was buying from a great, like family-owned chicken purveyor up on the North Shore of Chicago that was doing all organic, natural chicken. And we got the product, and it was like, they're actually buying it for less expensive than a lot of the people who are buying it from the big, buying chicken directly from the bigger purveyors of the Cisco's of the world, or even, some of the meat purveyors. And you're like, you're buying something that's better and less expensive. Why don't we introduce this to some more people? And what a cool thing to have happen. I mean, we try to take advantage of our ability to negotiate, even though we don't have a lot of centralized purchasing. We still do try to get the best pricing, shopping stuff on a weekly basis, or between two vendors for that same product. You're right. This could be a 6-month lesson. I will say this, that there is a difference between value and perceived value, and ultimately, perceived value is much more important to the guest. Does a guest think that they have gotten, if something's $18, it's not a question of whether 18 is too expensive or too inexpensive, was it worth $18 to them? And we spend a lot of time thinking about perceived value on something. But taste for us is always number one, and cost is number two, or taste and presentation are one. So we don't think a lot of times about just driving the costs lower. There are certainly a lot of tricks you can do in terms of menu mix that can help you do that. If you are selling pastas that have a low food cost and entrees and steaks that have a high food cost, the more people who buy pasta, you're going to end up a lower cost of goods. So we spend a lot of time kind of engineering what we're selling to think about that.
I almost didn't get my first job at Levy Restaurants because the director of operations asked me that question. What's more important? Would you rather sell a pasta that costs you $2.50 and sell it for $10, or a steak that's $40 with a food cost of 40%? And I argued that, the pasta, and he's like, no, gross profit margin, man, you want to sell the steaks, So what
I agree that dollars go to the bottom line, but I don't necessarily agree that you can't engineer a menu to be, to hit your goals. And it's a little bit of both.
Right.
So
yeah, I agree.
There's a blend.
For sure. What changes have you or will you be making to how you source products? What steps are you taking to ensure that you're using the appropriate product for each operation? I think some of this is geared toward, is there a new quality assurance step in there because of the pandemic?
Yeah. We spend a lot of time vetting our vendors before this ever happened. So we have a person in our corporate office that's always been dedicated to food safety and customer safety. He's a partner in Lettuce. It's a huge advantage that we have that infrastructure to do so. So we inspect vendors before we sign them up. So anyone that we're working with, even though there might be hundreds of them, there are, there's a certain amount of trust built in into that we assume that they're taking food safety seriously, and people who don't take it seriously probably aren't delivering to us. So I don't see like huge changes happening from Lettuce's perspective, because we felt like we were doing that beforehand.
Okay. Here's a question that came in from Sheila Moore. People and families are traveling more. Is the industry being overly cautious versus the concerns of the traveling public?
Meaning, well, our cautiousness has nothing to do with our own beliefs, right? We are, whether we believe that it's safe to eat in the restaurant, we are being restricted by governmental order, not for anything that we're doing. So regardless of where I feel we should be on the spectrum, we're just trying to abide by what's going on and what makes our employees and our guests feel safe. So no, I don't think we're being overly cautious, making people wear masks. We do temperature checks. In Illinois, we're asking people if they've traveled from a restricted area. All that, I think, does help. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that says, if everyone just wore masks for 4 or 5 weeks, that you'd see the virus really start to disappear. So at the end of the day, we are just following. I don't think the restaurant business can make or break what happens probably in America. There needs to be some responsibility, but we're certainly part of a recovery plan. And I think that we're just going to be compliant with what the government wants us to do.
For sure. Okay. Here's an interesting question. Have you seen any creative ways recently to raise capital? So I'm assuming that, this might be somebody who's trying to keep the restaurant afloat and maybe looking for some investors. Have you seen any creative ways to raise capital?
I haven't, but we're also not in a position that we're doing that right now. So it's not top of mind or what I see going on. I think you're seeing there definitely is money going into, you do see that there's mergers and acquisitions happening. It's not maybe happening as rapidly as it was before. And people are certainly going out there to fundraise for what they want to do. But I think that institutional capital is looking for real safe bets right now. And I haven't seen. So no, the answer is I don't know a lot, really creative ways. But,
yeah, I mean, I imagine it would, investing in a restaurant right now would not be top of mind for a lot of investors, unfortunately. So here's a general leadership question. If maybe you could sketch the broad strokes for this participant. What steps does your company take to prepare an operations manager for the next step to become an AGM and a GM?
Sure. Our management training program, regardless of COVID time, not COVID time, whatever is happening, is pretty simple. Anyone who joins the company, regardless of their position, if they came and joined us as a general manager or as a person with no management experience outside, fresh out of college or high school, our management training program is about 12 weeks long. They spend about 6 weeks, 5 weeks in the front of the house. They spend another 5 in the back of the house learning the people and learning the systems that we do. And then another 2 weeks in the office, kind of learning about financials and I'd call it like regulations, compliance and health insurance and all that sort of stuff. So that is how any manager who joins Let Us Entertain You learns. The process of preparing people to grow happens with job responsibilities that they get, and they get increased job responsibilities at the restaurants as they grow from a young manager to a more accomplished manager. They end up picking up more of the purchasing of the business and more of the general finance. Over time, they might have very limited responsibilities for just managing a shift and trying to do their best to manage a restaurant or just the people in a restaurant early on. Then, they kind of grow into developing into scheduling and then grow into, like I said, financial parts and then managing other managers as they grow up the ranks. I mean, it's a big learning curve for someone. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, a lot of it cannot be short-circuited with anything but time. You need time to get better at the job. And I think that you find that someone who is 24 gets to be a lot better when they're 27, and we invest time in them, and hopefully they invest time in us. And it doesn't always work out. You put a lot of time into people and they end up getting another job or moving, and it ends up being okay. So.
Okay. So we have a question that came in from Pepe Guzman. Thank you, Pepe. How are the guests reacting to the COVID surcharge on every check? Are you charging a COVID surcharge in
we do
restaurants?
One, there's a huge amount of expense that goes into, obviously we have limited dining rooms. We did have huge price fluctuations when we started it. You'd seen beef prices and chicken pricing going to astronomical highs in April and May. We have a 4% surcharge. It is 100% removable by the guest if they just ask us to remove it. I think there is the small percentage of people that really hate it, get mad at us, often take it out on the staff. It's kind of unfortunate. They say, if you're going to put a 4% surcharge on, then I'm only going to leave 16. I was going to leave 20%, but I'll only leave 16% for the server. It's sort of unfortunate, especially in a world where it can be removed. But at the end of the day, we have a lot of costs and expense in going on, contact tracing, PPE that we have to buy, sanitizer everywhere, limited dining rooms, all those things that go into it. We just have a gigantic expense. And so do I think that there are some people who don't like it 100%? It's funny, we had, in Las Vegas, actually, we had the most opposition to it. And I'm not really sure why. I think they felt that it was akin to like a resort fee that some of the hotels were charging. And a lot of people said, why don't you just raise prices instead? And I've liked the notion that we're not raising a lot of prices. Sometimes we've had to, just because of cost of items have gone up or whatever. But, it's been a method of trying to keep price raising low. And in Las Vegas, the guest was saying, we'd rather have you raise the price and get rid of the charge. And you're like, well, that's a very funny place to be, because it's optional.
Right.
We're taking out, no questions asked. So why would you want to pay more when you couldn't? But that's what we found. And we ended up doing a little bit of a price adjustment in Las Vegas that accomplished the same thing, that we have those costs. So,
okay. Any plans to move to an automatic gratuity or a system where there are no tips for the employees?
you know, we've done the math on it. We in a world where you get rid, yes, where you go to a flat fee. You know, I don't know if the guest is 100% there. I think it's certainly something that we have studied. I think it's definitely more acceptable in fine dining. Alinea, you know, does that where there's an automatic 20% service charge, and all the hourly employees are paid an hourly rate that is much higher, $50, $60 an hour, or whatever it is. We are supposed to do a restaurant with them. We're opening Umbria, so we're doing a joint venture with the Alinea group, and I suspect that's where we would experiment with it the most. When we get that restaurant open, it was supposed to open this fall. We have no idea when it will, but I do think we'll still do it. So, so the answer is we're open to looking at it. I think that this pandemic has caused you to think about every aspect of what happened, and stuff that might not have been on the table before is definitely on the table. There are no rules in survival and getting through this. So.
Okay. So we're almost at the end of our time. For the folks who are on now, and of course we're going to be, you know, broadcasting this, what words of encouragement would you give, RJ, to fellow restaurateurs, you know, at all levels? We have chefs, we have single unit operators, we have folks in corporate ranks.
I said at the beginning, it's the importance of being positive. I think the best leaders need to be positive. A majority of the time, being down is what gets everyone else down. And your job as a leader and a person is to get other people up. And it is really hard to get out of bed every day, like when things are really bad, and be positive. But, you know, whatever, find that nugget of thing that makes you happy, that one thing that you did that day that made an improvement in your company or in your restaurant. And that's all I try to do every day. And the easier, you know, it's okay to be down. I call my siblings. I'm lucky to work with a brother and sister and a dad who can give advice when you get down there and you say, I'm really worried about this. And yeah, you should be worried about it, but there's a lot of good things to look forward to. Mm-hmm. You know, I know that I can't promise that a vaccine will work. I can't promise that things will, you know, be perfect, but this will pass. This will end. I'm not sure when, I'm not sure whenever, but we're going to get to the end of it, and there'll be a new life to look forward to again. So
yeah, amen. Stay positive. Stay positive. RJ, thanks so much for your time. I know you've got a lot of restaurants to look over.
I appreciate it. I'm going to hop off. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks everybody for joining.